Before this story continues, please allow me to say one thing clearly. The story you are about to hear is a fictional narrative created for educational and entertainment purposes. It reflects toxic family dynamics and the inner journey of a woman who endured in silence for far too long. All characters' events and situations are entirely fictional and do not represent any real individuals or actual events. This content may be supported by AI tools during its creative process. The story does not promote violence, hatred, or harm in any form. It is told to evoke empathy, reflection, and personal growth, especially for women who have sacrificed, endured, and been wounded within their own families. The entire narrative is advertiser-friendly, aligned with YouTube community guidelines, and does not target or imply any real person. If you recognize a part of your own life in this story, please stay until the end. And if your heart is touched, share your thoughts in the comments or follow the channel to continue walking alongside stories meant for women who have been overlooked yet deserve to be seen and respected. Now that you know this story is fictional, we can begin. My name is Vera. I am 27 years old, and until November of 2024, my world was small, quiet, and structured by routines I trusted. I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, in a modest apartment close enough to the hospital district that I could walk to work when the weather was kind. I worked as a medical billing specialist, which meant I spent my days reading codes, verifying claims, and catching small inconsistencies most people never noticed. My mother Evelyn used to say it was the perfect job for me because I noticed what others skipped. She was the only person who ever said that with pride. My mother passed away after a long illness just days before Thanksgiving, and her absence hollowed out everything familiar. Glenn Mercer. My stepfather had been married to her for 18 years. He was 52, polished, articulate, and deeply concerned with how things looked from the outside. His daughter Alyssa was 29, confident, charming, and always certain she belonged in every room she entered. Daniel Klein was the attorney my mother trusted, a quiet man in his 50s who believed in process more than persuasion. Tina Rowe was the estate administrator who handled logistics and escrow, neutral by design, precise by profession. These names mattered because what happened next would bind all of us together, whether we wanted it or not. The betrayal did not come in a courtroom or over a dramatic announcement. It came in the parking lot behind the old stone church, the pavement still damp from a light Charleston rain, the air thick with the smell of wet leaves and lilies. I was still holding the folded program from my mother's funeral when Glenn stepped in front of me, not to embrace me, but to block my path. He did not lower his voice. He did not ask how I was holding up. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they intend to solve quickly. "We need to be practical," he said, as if grief was an inconvenience we could schedule around. Then he placed a thin folder into my hands. The title on the first page read, "Temporary Authority and Control." My fingers tightened around the paper without opening it. Alyssa stood just behind him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her expression careful, almost sympathetic. "Mom would not want you making big decisions right now," she said softly, just loud enough for me to hear and just gentle enough to sound concerned if anyone else was listening. Glenn turned slightly so a few people from the church steps could see us and smiled in that practiced way he used whenever he wanted to appear reasonable. "She is grieving," he said, nodding toward me. "I will handle this for her." The word "for her" landed like a dismissal, not protection. He began listing things the way someone reads from a receipt. "The house, the insurance, the stability we gave you. We have always taken care of you, Vera. This is simply the next step." His tone suggested cooperation was expected, gratitude required. I did not argue. I did not cry. Inside, something tightened and went very still. I had learned years ago that arguing with someone who controlled the narrative only fed them. I opened the folder just enough to see signature lines already marked, dates pre-filled, urgency implied. Alyssa leaned closer and murmured, "We just want what is best for the family." The word family was used like leverage, not love. Glenn added quietly, "If you do not sign, people will talk. They will wonder why you are making this difficult at a time like this." he did not threaten me with anger. He threatened me with a reputation with moral judgment, with being labeled ungrateful while still wearing black. In that moment, the strangest calm settled over me. I remembered something my mother once said while we sat at our kitchen table long before she got sick. If someone needs your signature immediately, she had said it is because time is the only thing protecting you. I looked at the papers again and thought, if they want this so quickly, the documents are not on their side. I closed the folder and handed it back to Glenn. I am not signing anything today, I said. My voice did not shake. For a fraction of a second, his expression slipped. Then it hardened into something colder. Alyssa inhaled sharply, as if I had offended her personally. Glenn straightened and glanced toward the church one last time before lowering his voice. "Then you cannot stay under my roof tonight," he said. "Not like this. Not if you are going to be difficult." The sentence was delivered cleanly without drama, as if removing me was a reasonable boundary. I nodded once. I had already stopped expecting mercy. If you have ever been pressured by family to surrender something you knew was not theirs type, I am still here in the comments. I walked to my car with the funeral program still in my hand, the rain finally beginning to fall harder, and drove away without knowing where I would sleep. That night as I sat alone, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Monday, 9 a.m. Do not come alone. That was when I understood that saying no had not ended anything. It had started something much larger, and for the first time I was ready to let the system speak. By the time I reached the small borrowed room where I would spend that night, the shock of being told to leave had settled into something quieter and heavier. It was not rage. It was recognition. What happened in the parking lot did not come out of nowhere. It was the natural conclusion of a pattern that had been forming for years, one I had learned to survive by becoming smaller inside my own home. When I thought back, the signs were never loud. They were polite. Glenn was always careful to be the kind of man neighbors trusted. On our quiet Charleston street, he waved at everyone, helped with trash cans, spoke warmly about family values. If anyone asked about me, he smiled and said things like, "Vera is sensitive," or "Vera means well but does not understand money yet." Those words sounded harmless to outsiders, even affectionate. Inside the house, they landed differently. They were explanations for why my opinions did not matter and why decisions happened without me. Alyssa absorbed this hierarchy without effort. She did not have to ask for things. They arrived as if pre-approved. When she finished college, a job appeared through someone Glenn knew. When her lease ended, a newer car replaced the old one with a casual remark about safety. Trips were planned and paid for under the phrase, "Mom would be proud," a sentence that hollowed out my chest every time it was used. My mother Evelyn noticed. She pushed back when she could, gently at first, then with more insistence as her health declined. She would say things like, "Let Vera finish," or "She handles her own finances just fine." Glenn would nod, smile, and change the subject. Afterward, he would pull me aside and say, "Your mother worries too much," or "You know she gets emotional." It was always framed as concern. That made it harder to call what it was. The unfairness did not announce itself. It accumulated. When I was 19 and still living at home to save money, Glenn decided I should pay rent. He called it responsibility. My mother argued quietly in the kitchen while I stood in the hallway pretending not to listen. He insisted it would build character. Alyssa never paid $1. When I asked why, Glenn said she needs support right now. "You are stronger." The word stronger became another way of saying expendable. Over time, access became another tool. Glenn changed passwords on family accounts under the excuse of security. I found myself removed from shared plans and group billing without explanation. One day, my phone plan stopped working. When I asked, Glenn said, "It is simpler this way. You can manage your own now." The tone was calm, final. My mother looked at me apologetically, as if she wanted to say more, but did not have the strength to fight another battle. The deepest cut was how Glenn spoke about my work. I chose medical billing because it allowed me to support myself without debt and because I understood systems. I knew how errors hid in small places. Glenn dismissed it with a laugh. "You just push codes all day," he said once at dinner while Alyssa scrolled on her phone. It was said casually, but it stripped the dignity from the thing that paid my rent and kept my credit clean. The irony was not lost on me even then. I survived because I learned to watch closely. My mother taught me that silence could be a tool. If you stay quiet long enough, she said once while folding, laundry people will tell you the truth they are trying to hide. I carried that with me. I listened when Glenn spoke to others. I watched how he treated my mother when he thought no one noticed. I felt guilt settle in as her illness progressed, a quiet shame that I had not protected her more, that I had chosen stability over confrontation. After she passed, that guilt sharpened. Sorting through her belongings felt invasive and necessary at the same time. In the back of her nightstand, beneath old receipts and folded appointment cards, I found something unexpected. A bank key card, wrapped in a faded envelope. Inside was a small note in her handwriting. "If he pushes, do not argue. Call Daniel." My hands shook as I read it. My mother had anticipated this moment. She had known pressure would come disguised as reason. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I understood that my calm reaction in the parking lot was not accidental. It was inherited. I did not live recklessly. I was not wealthy in obvious ways, but I was careful. I checked my credit report regularly. I read statements line by line. I understood verification processes because my job depended on them. I kept records because I had learned that memory alone was not protection. On my phone, buried among contacts, was a single initial. K. No last name. No context. Just someone I trusted enough to save without explanation. That trust had been earned quietly over time. As the days after the funeral passed, Glenn grew bolder. He sent a message that read, "We will announce a solution after Thanksgiving." The word "announce" made my stomach tighten. It suggested an audience, a decision already framed my role reduced to compliance. The pattern was repeating, but this time the stakes were higher. When I looked again at my mother's note, I did not feel panic. I felt clarity. She had prepared me without making me afraid. Comment: paper trail. If you have ever kept receipts for your own safety. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Charleston sky that presses low without threatening rain. I arrived at Daniel Klein's office a few minutes early and sat in my car until the dashboard clock turned exactly 9. The building was downtown brick and narrow, shared with accountants and small firms that did quiet work behind unremarkable doors. There was no grandeur to it, no marble lobby or dramatic artwork. That alone steadied me. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Daniel's conference room was modest. A long table, polished smooth from years of elbows and files, law books lining one wall, a single framed print of Charleston Harbor on the other. Glenn was already seated when I walked in. He chose the chair closest to the head of the table legs, crossed hands folded, as if the space belonged to him by default. Alyssa sat beside him, her phone placed face up on the table screen, dark, but positioned carefully. It was not subtle. It was a reminder that she was ready to record if the moment suited her. Daniel nodded at me and gestured to the chair across from them. I sat down, placed my bag at my feet, and folded my hands in my lap. I did not smile. I did not look at the phone. Daniel began without ceremony. He spoke slowly, clearly, his voice level in a way that made the room feel smaller. He outlined the purpose of the meeting and the documents he would read. As he spoke, I noticed Glenn's expression tighten just enough to reveal impatience. He was used to rooms bending toward him. This one did not. When Daniel read the provision naming me as the sole beneficiary, there was no gasp, no dramatic pause. He simply continued explaining that I held the controlling interest in the primary holding entity, and that the estate comprised multiple entities' leases and trusts structured over time. He avoided numbers. He used language meant for adults who understood responsibility rather than spectacle. I listened without reacting. Inside suspicion replaced shock. Glenn shifted in his chair. Alyssa's fingers tapped lightly against the phone. Daniel continued explaining that the structure gave me decision-making authority across the portfolio subject to existing obligations. Glenn cleared his throat, a sound meant to interrupt. Daniel did not stop. Then came the clause my mother had warned me about, delivered with the same measured tone. Any attempt to coerce, compel, or rush a transfer of control within 180 days would trigger an automatic redirection of assets into a charitable trust. The effect was immediate. Glenn's posture stiffened. His hands unclasped, then clasped again. It was not anger that crossed his face. It was calculation colliding with a locked door. The system had anticipated him. Daniel finished reading and closed the folder. For a moment, no one spoke. Glenn leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice lowered as if appealing to reason. "Your mother would want unity," he said. "She would not want this kind of division." The word unity was used the way it always was, as a synonym for compliance. Alyssa turned toward me, her expression sharpening. "You did not even take care of her the way Dad did," she said, her voice steady enough to sound factual. The accusation landed hard. It rewrote months of quiet vigilance into neglect. I felt heat rise behind my eyes but did not speak. Daniel looked at Alyssa, then back at his notes as if acknowledging the comment without granting it weight. Glenn continued, softer now. "This is a lot for you. You are young, emotional. We are only trying to protect what your mother built." I let the words pass through me without catching. When Daniel asked if there were questions, I finally spoke. My voice surprised me with how even it sounded. "Is there an audit trail for any signature request related to these documents?" The question hung in the air. Daniel looked up at me fully for the first time, something like recognition passing across his face. "Yes," he said. "Any request would generate a detailed record. Device time routing. That matters." I nodded once. Glenn frowned slightly as if recalibrating. Daniel slid a thin packet toward me. "These are the protocols I recommend you follow," he said. He outlined them one by one. "Do not sign anything outside this office. Do not respond to wire instructions by phone. Place a fraud alert on your credit. Route all communication through counsel." His tone was calm, procedural. Glenn leaned back, jaw tight. Alyssa's phone remained dark. The meeting ended without resolution, but the balance had shifted. As I stood to leave, I understood something clearly. I was no longer waiting to see what would happen. I was preparing to endure it quietly within the lines that would protect me. After the meeting at Daniel's office, the air in my life changed. Not because anyone apologized, but because everyone began moving like a clock had started. Glenn did not call me to ask how I was doing. He sent a short message the next day with a time and an address in Mount Pleasant, framed as reconciliation. "Dinner, 7 o'clock. We should talk as a family." The phrasing sounded gentle, but I heard the underlying assumption. He believed the outcome was still his to manage. Mount Pleasant was familiar, the kind of place where the parking lots were clean and the restaurants had soft lighting and polite servers who called everyone Mom and Sir. It felt like the exact setting Glenn preferred when he wanted to appear reasonable in public. The restaurant was upscale, but not extravagant linen napkins. Muted music wine glasses set precisely the kind of place where conflict could be disguised as a calm conversation. Glenn chose a corner booth. When I arrived, he stood, smiled, and touched my shoulder lightly, as if we were already at peace. Alyssa was seated beside him, posture perfect, phone tucked away. This time her politeness sharpened like a blade. Glenn began speaking before I had fully settled into my seat. He had prepared a speech, not a conversation. He leaned forward with his hands folded, tone even, and said he had been thinking a lot about what my mother would want. He spoke about legacy stability, the importance of protecting things during an emotional time. He used phrases like, "for your own good," and "we can help you make the right decisions." It sounded like concern. It felt like control. The server brought water. Glenn waited until the glasses were placed, then slid a folder across the table with the same practiced smoothness he used in the church parking lot. "Temporary control," he said softly, as if naming medicine. "Just for now, while you get your footing." Alyssa smiled and added, "You can keep your little apartment. Dad will handle the big stuff." The words little and big were not accidental. They shrank my life into something childish and made their authority sound like a favor. I opened the folder slowly. The pages were familiar in structure, signatures, pre-placed language, sterile, the kind of document that looked harmless until you understood what it meant. Glenn watched my face closely, waiting for hesitation to become surrender. When I did not react, he shifted his tone. Vera, you are confused right now, he said. You are emotional, not stable. He spoke the words with the calm confidence of a man who believed labeling someone was the same as proving something. Then he said the line that cut deepest because it sounded like something people might believe. You are not thinking clearly since the funeral. The restaurant hummed around us, forks clinking, low laughter from another table, a couple sharing dessert nearby. No one looked our way. Glenn knew how to stage cruelty inside normalcy. I felt my throat tighten, not from fear but from the realization that he was willing to rewrite my grief into a weakness he could weaponize. I kept my voice low. I am not signing, I said. It was not dramatic. It was a boundary. Hit like if you believe no is a complete sentence. Glenn's face hardened, the smile fading. Alyssa's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed sweet. You are making this harder than it needs to be, she said. We are offering you support. I did not argue. I did what Daniel had trained me to do, which was to let details speak. I turned the pages and pointed to a section that referenced an electronic signature request. My tone remained calm. Why is this DocuSign request dated at 2:14 a.m., I asked. Glenn blinked once. His eyes moved to the page, then back to me. I continued, not accusing, only observing. Why does it route to your office IP? The question did not need an answer to do its work. It placed doubt into the room like a drop of ink in clear water. Glenn's mouth tightened. Alyssa shifted in her seat, the first crack in her composure. Glenn leaned back and exhaled as if I had exhausted him. You have been talking to lawyers and getting yourself worked up, he said. This is exactly what I mean. You are not well right now. He was changing tactics. When persuasion failed, he reached for isolation. He lowered his voice and delivered the threat with the same controlled calm. If you refuse to cooperate, you will never see family again. The sentence was meant to scare me into compliance by threatening belonging. I looked at him and understood he was not offering family. He was offering captivity. I closed the folder and slid it back toward him. I am not signing, I repeated. The words were quiet, but they held. For a moment, Glenn stared at me as if deciding which version of himself to use next. Then he nodded slowly, as though he were the one making the choice. Fine, he said. If you want to do this, you can do it alone. He reached into his jacket pocket and set down a small card on the table. It was a key card from the house. My mother's house. He pushed it toward himself again, not toward me. You are not welcome back, he said. Not until you come to your senses. Alyssa watched me with an expression that almost looked satisfied. Glenn continued, voice steady. And if you try to tell anyone I did this to you, I will go public first. He did not shout. He did not threaten in obvious terms. He implied a narrative he could sell. You are unstable, Vera. People will understand why I had to step in. Sympathy was his currency, and he intended to spend it against me. I stood slowly, leaving my water untouched. The server approached with the first course, paused when she saw my posture, then retreated politely. Glenn did not move. He wanted me to leave so he could say I stormed out. I did not give him that. I walked out at an even pace, the air outside cooler, the parking lot lights reflecting off wet pavement. In my car, my hands trembled for the first time all night. Not because I doubted my choice, but because I saw how far he was willing to go. As I drove back toward Charleston, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the HOA property portal. Someone logged in as you. My stomach dropped. The threat had shifted from words to action, and I knew the next step would not happen at a dinner table. I did not drive back to my apartment that night. The message about the HOA property portal echoed in my head like an alarm I could not turn off. I went somewhere I knew had quiet and coverage, a small Isle of Palms property my mother had arranged access to years ago, the kind of place you keep for practical reasons, not to show off. It was modest by coastal standards, clean raised slightly on pilings with storm shutters, and a porch that smelled faintly of salt and sunscreen. The cameras were not there for drama. They were there because the insurance discount made sense, and because my mother believed safety was not paranoia, it was planning. When I arrived, the exterior lights triggered softly, and the camera indicator blinked once. Inside, I locked the door and set my bag down by the kitchen counter. My hands were steady now. Fear was expensive. I could not afford it. I opened my laptop at the small dining table and logged into the HOA and property portal tied to the entities Daniel had described in careful adult language. The screen loaded slowly, and when it finally appeared, my chest tightened. There was an access event I did not recognize. A login as me from a device and location that were not mine. The date was recent, the timing too close to my dinner in Mount Pleasant to be coincidence. I did not guess. I did not accuse. I did what I had done for years in my own life and at work. I checked the details. I clicked through the activity history and looked for anything that had changed. Mailing address update attempts, contact information edits, a request to route certain notifications to a different email. Then I saw it, an attempt to update bank instructions for outgoing payments. It was not completed, but it was initiated. My skin went cold. I took a breath and did not move for a full count of 3, because rushing makes mistakes, and mistakes become leverage for people like Glenn. I navigated to the export function and requested an activity history download, a clean record with timestamps, device identifiers, and routing details. It felt ordinary, like pulling a report, but the stakes made the air in the room feel thinner. A notification popped up confirming the export request. That was proof, not a feeling. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Are you safe? Do not engage him directly. Forward me anything you find. I replied that I was safe and that I had logs. Then another message came through from a number I had not saved. Lucia Ramos. Daniel said you may need eyes on logs. I can come by tonight. Lucia arrived within an hour, not with drama or speeches, but with a laptop bag and the posture of someone who had spent years in rooms where facts mattered more than volume. She was practical mid-40s, hair pulled back, glasses that reflected the screen light when she worked. She set her laptop on the table and asked one question. Show me the portal history. There was no judgment in her tone, only focus. We worked side by side, comparing access times, mapping patterns, identifying what was attempted and what succeeded. Lucia pointed to a device signature and shook her head slightly. This is not your usual browser footprint, she said. Whoever did this knew enough to try, but not enough to mimic you perfectly. Her calm made my own calm easier to hold. A second visitor arrived after Lucia. Tina Rowe, the estate admin who handled process details and kept her emotions out of her face. She sat down, opened a small notebook, and explained something I had not fully understood before. Notary work has an electronic journal, she said. Every notarization is logged, date, time, ID, type, location. If anyone claims you signed something with a notary, we can verify whether it matches the journal and the license lookup. Then she added the next layer, the banking layer. Banks use verification phrases and multi-step checks for wire changes. If an email claims urgent wire change, it triggers red flags if the verification sequence is wrong. Hearing her say it out loud made something settle in me. There were lines in place. Glenn could push, but the system had friction points. We were still working when an email notification arrived in the portal inbox. It was addressed to me, but the sender was not a real domain I recognized. The subject line was short and urgent. Wire change needed immediately. The message was written in my name, requesting a bank instructions update due to an emergency. It included a routing number and an account number and a tone designed to hurry someone into compliance. Lucia read it once and looked up. This is a classic attempt, she said. Tina nodded. They rely on urgency because urgency bypasses verification. My mouth went dry, not because I was surprised, but because I recognized the strategy. Glenn was not just threatening to label me unstable. He was trying to create a paper trail that made it look like I was making reckless changes. He was trying to move money or control through confusion. I forwarded the email to Daniel as an attachment and also saved the headers because Daniel had taught me that what matters is not just what is said, but where it came from. Lucia guided me through preserving the portal logs in a way that would stand up under scrutiny, including exporting activity history and capturing session details. I did not panic. I did not cry. I felt something else, a quiet tightening in my spine, the sense that my mother's warning had been correct. If he pushes, do not argue. Document. Tina confirmed the steps that would make the next stage harder for him. Notary journal verification, bank verification phrase, enforcement, counsel-only communication. I watched the receipts accumulate on my screen like pieces of a shield. Subscribe if you want stories where paperwork beats manipulation. Daniel called just before midnight, his voice low and steady. You did the right thing by going somewhere safe, he said. There is more. Glenn filed a petition for conservatorship. The word landed like a weight. It was exactly what he had hinted at, the claim that I was not stable, that I could not manage grief, that someone else should step in for my own protection. Daniel continued as calm as if he were reading a checklist. We will respond, but understand what this means. He is moving from pressure to paperwork warfare. Then he gave me the next escalation without softening it. There will be an emergency board meeting, he said. He is pushing to remove you, to block your authority, to frame this as governance. My pulse quickened, but my voice stayed even. When? Soon, Daniel said. Faster than normal because he wants momentum. After I ended the call, I stared at the exported logs on my laptop. Outside, the wind moved through the palms and the camera indicator blinked quietly in the corner of the porch. The sanctuary was real, but it was not peace. It was preparation, and I could feel the next room opening ahead of me. The days that followed felt like standing on a shoreline while the tide kept rising. Nothing dramatic happened in a single burst, but pressure spread into every corner of my life, the way damp air finds its way through a closed window. Glenn understood community better than courts. He started there. It began with concerned friends, the kind of people who brought casseroles when someone passed away and asked gentle questions that sounded like care. I would get texts from numbers I recognized only vaguely, neighbors who had once waved at my mother, women from the church group my mother sometimes attended when she felt strong enough. They wrote things like, "We are praying for you, and grief can be so confusing, and let us know if you need someone to talk to." At first I was grateful. Then I noticed the pattern. The questions were not about how I was eating or sleeping. They were about whether I was making big decisions. They were about whether I had support. They were about whether someone should step in. It was a smear wrapped in kindness. In grocery store aisles and parking lots, people's eyes lingered a second too long, polite smiles paired with that careful tone older women use when they believe they are handling something fragile. I could almost hear Glenn's voice behind theirs, calm and authoritative, telling them his version of the story. He did not have to say I was unstable. He only had to imply I was overwhelmed, and the community would complete the sentence for him. Alyssa amplified it the way her generation knew how to. She posted online without naming me, the kind of half-hidden message that still landed where it was meant to land. Some people are not fit to manage grief, she wrote, followed by a line about protecting legacies and making responsible choices. It was vague enough to deny, sharp enough to wound. People commented hearts and praying hands. A few wrote, "I am here if you need anything." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. It was humiliating in a quiet way, the kind of humiliation that makes you question your own reality, because no one is overtly cruel. They were concerned. They were supportive. They were building a stage where my refusal to comply would look like a symptom. At the same time, Glenn moved on the practical levers. Lucia called me early one morning and said she was seeing attempted restrictions on access permissions in the portal environment. Certain accounts were suddenly listed as view only for my profile, flagged for safety review. I did not believe in coincidence anymore. Glenn was trying to freeze me out under the pretense of protecting assets from an emotional beneficiary. Daniel confirmed that this was a known tactic. If they can create a temporary appearance of instability, they can justify temporary controls, and temporary controls become permanent if you do not stop them quickly. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear of losing money, but from the violation of being treated like a problem to be managed. Then the pressure reached my work, which was where I felt most grounded. I was at my desk at the billing office when my supervisor asked if I could step into a small conference room. Her expression was careful, almost apologetic. She said someone had called HR to verify my mental fitness. That was the phrase she used, as if she could not quite believe it either. The caller did not say his name, but he described himself as family and expressed concerns about my ability to handle sensitive work during grief. He asked whether I had access to patient accounts and whether anyone was supervising me. My stomach dropped so fast it made me dizzy. It was such a specific kind of cruelty because it targeted the one place where I felt competent and respected. It also targeted something older viewers understand instinctively. Your job is your dignity. Attacking it is not an argument. It is sabotage. My supervisor told me they had not given any information, but they were required to note the call. She asked gently if I was okay. I nodded and said yes because I did not trust my voice. When I returned to my desk, I felt the room tilt slightly, the normal sounds of keyboards and phones suddenly distant. I wanted to fold. I wanted to disappear. For a few minutes, I stared at my hands and imagined what my mother would say if she were sitting across from me. I heard her voice in my mind, soft but firm. Do not let them pull you into their story. I walked out to my car at lunch and sat with the engine off, just breathing. The pressure had become so constant that silence felt unfamiliar. I said the truth out loud to myself slowly, as if speaking it could anchor me. I do not need to win them, I whispered. I only need not to be dragged down with them. That was the difference. Winning would require their acknowledgement. Survival required only my steadiness. I called Daniel from the parking lot. He told me he was arranging a boardroom exposure, the kind of meeting where claims would have to face records. He reminded me of the 4-step protocol again, not as theory, but as lifeline. Counsel only. No signatures outside office. No wire changes without verification phrase. Preserve logs. He said Glenn was moving fast and acting confident, which usually meant he believed he had something that looked like proof. A forged signature, a manufactured document, something he thought could stand long enough to intimidate people who did not want conflict. After I ended the call, my finger hovered over the contact labeled K. I had not used it in a long time, and that was the point. When you truly trust someone, you do not spend that trust casually. I pressed call. The line connected quickly, as if the other person had expected my voice eventually. I did not introduce myself. I did not explain the entire situation. I kept it to one sentence because clarity is safer than emotion. I need the access logs preserved, I said. There was a brief pause, the kind that sounded like someone checking a mental checklist. Then the voice on the other end answered, calm and certain. Already done. The words landed with unexpected force, not because they were dramatic, but because they meant I was not alone in the way Glenn wanted me to be. It meant someone had been watching quietly the way I had. I ended the call and sat still, letting that one sentence steady my breathing. When I returned to work, I moved through the afternoon as if carrying something fragile inside my chest, not fear, but resolve. That evening, Lucia sent another update. More attempted access changes. Another email spoof. Tina confirmed again that any notary claim could be verified against the electronic journal. Daniel messaged late with a final note that made my skin prickle. He is acting like he already has signed paper, he wrote. He thinks the room will believe him. The smear campaign, the HR call, the community concern, it all had one purpose: to make his forged narrative feel plausible. And as I stared at the message, I understood the cliff ahead. Glenn was not preparing to negotiate. He was preparing to present a document and dare anyone to challenge it. The board meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room near the harbor part of a community development office that overlooked slow-moving water and cranes in the distance. It was not a grand setting, which made it worse for Glenn. There were no chandeliers or long speeches planned, just a rectangular table, neutral carpet, and a few people from outside organizations who had been invited because of the project scope. A reporter sat quietly in the back corner with a notebook, not officially press, but present enough to make every word carry weight. I arrived early with Daniel and took a seat without speaking. Lucia and Tina joined a few minutes later, laptops closed, posture calm. Glenn came in last wearing the same navy blazer he wore to church, the one that made him look composed even when he was furious. Alyssa followed closely, her phone already in her hand as if it were part of her body. Glenn took the chair opposite mine and placed his hands on the table as though it belonged to him. When the board chair called the meeting to order, Glenn leaned forward, his voice low and steady, the tone of a man performing concern. "I just want to protect Evelyn's legacy," he said, pausing long enough for the name to settle in the room. He spoke about family, about grief, about responsibility. He said he had stepped in because I was young and overwhelmed, and because my mother would not have wanted chaos. Alyssa nodded at the right moments, adding softly that we were worried about Vera, that she had been through so much, and that this was about love, not control. I did not look at either of them. I kept my eyes on the table grain, breathing evenly, letting the performance play out. Daniel did not interrupt. He waited until Glenn finished and the room fell into a careful silence. Then Daniel stood, not dramatically, just enough to be seen. He thanked the board for their time and said that the agenda today was governance, not feelings. He asked permission to present records, and when the chair nodded, he began. The first screen showed a DocuSign audit trail, plain and unadorned. Daniel did not accuse anyone. He read what was on the screen. IP address, time-stamp device type. He explained that the signature Glenn claimed to have was initiated at 2:14 in the morning, routed through an office network associated with Glenn's firm, not through any device associated with me. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the projector. Alyssa shifted in her chair. Glenn did not move. Daniel advanced the slide to a notary e-journal entry. Tina spoke, then her voice measured, confirming that the journal showed no matching appearance by me on the date listed, no verification of identity, no lawful acknowledgement. It was not a speech. It was a confirmation. Lucia followed with portal access logs showing attempted logins and changes initiated from credentials that did not match my activity history. She pointed to dates and times, nothing emotional, just a pattern. Finally, Daniel addressed the bank verification phrase. He explained that any legitimate wire change required a caller to pass a phrase known only to the account holder. The attempt attributed to me failed that requirement. Fraud prevention had flagged it automatically. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The evidence did the speaking. I watched the board members as the presentation continued. These were people used to contracts and compliance, not family drama. Their faces did not show shock, just focus. When Daniel finished, the board chair leaned back slightly and folded her hands. She did not look at me. She looked directly at Glenn. "This is governance, not family therapy," she said, each word clipped and precise. The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Glenn opened his mouth, perhaps to explain, perhaps to pivot, but the chair had already signaled to security. 2 staff members stepped forward politely and asked Glenn to step outside. Alyssa stood halfway, then sat back down, her phone forgotten on the table. Glenn looked at me, then finally his expression caught between disbelief and calculation. He said nothing as he was escorted out. In the silence that followed, Daniel requested a formal vote. The board reviewed the motion, confirming my authority as controlling member and beneficiary under the existing structures. Hands were raised. The decision was unanimous. The chair announced that based on the materials presented, the board would also be making a referral regarding attempted exploitation and document misrepresentation to the appropriate authorities. She said it the way one says the weather, factual and unavoidable. I felt something loosen in my chest, not triumph but release. The system had spoken. When the chair paused, Daniel looked at me briefly, a small nod, and then back to the room. I remained seated, hands folded, letting the outcome stand on its own. After the chair's statement, a few of the observers shifted in their seats. The reporter wrote quickly, head down. No one applauded. That was the point. This was not a spectacle. It was accountability. As the meeting adjourned, Daniel leaned toward me and whispered that this was the moment people would remember. Not because of money, but because process had prevailed over pressure. I stood and gathered my things. Before I left the room, I turned just enough to face the table and spoke for the first time. Comment. Justice, if you believe the truth, should have structure. Then I walked out without waiting for a response. The call came a week after the board meeting, not from an attorney or an intermediary, but from Glenn himself. He asked to meet for coffee as if nothing irreversible had happened, as if we were still operating inside the old assumptions where his voice set the terms. I chose a small neighborhood cafe not far from where I lived, the kind of place with chipped mugs and a short menu because neutrality mattered. When he arrived, he looked smaller than I remembered, not broken, just reduced by the absence of authority. He did not apologize. He went straight to what he wanted, which told me everything I needed to know. He said his legal situation was becoming complicated and expensive. He said people were misunderstanding his intentions. He said he had only stepped in for the family, and now he needed help cleaning up the mess. "Can you cover my legal mess?" he asked, lowering his voice as if that made it reasonable. "I did it for the family." I listened without interrupting, noticing how he framed everything as necessity rather than choice. When he finished, I did not raise my voice or explain my feelings. I gave him the truth in 2 sentences because clarity does not need decoration. You did not want a daughter, you wanted a signature. No. The words sat between us, complete and sufficient. He stared at me for a moment as if expecting a different ending, then pushed his cup away and stood up. He left without another word. There was no dramatic exit, no apology withheld, just a man discovering that leverage does not work when it is gone. The consequences unfolded the way systems do, quietly and thoroughly. The petition for conservatorship was formally dismissed, accompanied by a written warning regarding abuse of process. It was not a punishment meant to humiliate. It was a record. Glenn's reputation in the community shifted in subtle but permanent ways. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations changed tone. The same networks he had relied on to imply concern now kept a polite distance. Alyssa lost access to the systems she had once navigated effortlessly through family connection. Her job did not explode into scandal. It simply ended because credibility matters when oversight appears. I did not celebrate any of it. I watched from a distance and focused on what came next. With Daniel's help, I established a small fund aligned with what my mother had cared about: caregiver grants and hospice support for families who needed relief during long illnesses. It was practical and quiet, the opposite of a monument. We set clear criteria and transparent reporting because integrity should be visible. On the evening the paperwork finalized, I invited a few people who had stood by me without asking for anything in return. Lucia came. Tina came, and a couple of friends who had become family over the years. We ate simple food around a small table, talked about ordinary things, and laughed in a way that felt earned. There was no toast to victory. There did not need to be. A few days later, I went to my mother's grave alone. I brought no flowers, just myself. I stood there and let the quiet settle, feeling the absence without trying to fill it. I told her what had happened in plain language, the way she had taught me to speak when things mattered. I told her the terms had been honored. I kept the terms I said and felt a steadiness answer back, not from the ground, but from inside myself. Walking away, I understood that justice does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like refusal. Sometimes it looks like letting a system do what it is designed to do while you step out of the way. If this story touched you, share it. Someone needs permission to say no today.